Abby Maxman. I'm the President and CEO of Oxfam America, and I am so pleased to be with you today to welcome you to this important event. And I am especially honored that I will be able to welcome the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Education, Dr. Kumbu Boli-Berry. We're thrilled to have her with us for this event, to present her recent report and to provide an important health check on the right to education globally, especially in the context of the growth of private actors in education. This event is especially timely. We live in a world of growing inequality. This inequality plays out not just in economic statistics, but in outcomes for children and youth. In our new report, Oxfam finds that in developing countries, a child from a poor family is 7 times less likely to finish secondary education than a child from a rich country and family. And it is even worse for girls. Pulled out of school before their brothers, millions more of the world's poorest girls will continue to have their life chances limited by an education that is far too brief. These inequalities are exacerbated by the growing commercialization of education systems in many countries. Some government and donor policies are encouraging the expansion of fee charging for-profit private schooling. Oxfam research finds that while the World Bank Group is providing essential support to public education in many countries around the world, and why we are actually such strong advocates for IDA, some of the bank's advice, and increasingly its funding, is encouraging the expansion of for-profit private education. But evidence tells us that this approach excludes girls and the poorest children. At the same time, education can be a powerful response to inequality. High-quality public education, available for all children, free of charge and without discrimination, can reduce poverty, fight negative gender norms, boost social mobility and cohesion, and support prosperous and democratic societies. It empowers individuals and equalizes societies. In a unified and strong voice, this week, over 170 civil society organizations from 63 countries told the World Bank and its donors that it is time to recommit to public, free, quality education for all and cease support for for-profit commercial schools. Education is a fundamental right, and the growing trend of commercialization severely risks undermining that right. This is why the work of the UN Special Rapporteur is so important, and why we must understand education as a fundamental human right, not a commodity that belongs only to those who can afford it.
I want to say thank you to the President of CEO of Oxfam, and thank you also for your team. Thank you to all the NGOs who are in this room, all the researchers, students, and resource people who are really inside. Thank you, colleagues, for being here. I don't really like to make discourse. I want also to apologize because my English is not a good English. I'm in the process of learning. And it can be friend English I have to speak, but I hope we can understand each other. I'm so proud as a special rapporteur for UN to see how NGOs are really working in the level of education. And my first words is to say thank you and also my gratitude to the NGOs who are organizing themselves every day. And we know also, because in this process, some are victims of the power. Some are also teased by others. Sometimes are killed in the fields in some countries because they raise voices and human voices and the values of this humanity. And for me, it's really an opportunity just to say to those NGOs who engage themselves and who are human rights defenders and education defenders in this world. Thank you for doing this wonderful work, and you deserve that I thank you. The second message I really want to highlight, I have made a report on privatization and also the commercial private sector, but it's coming from the work of NGOs. And this work is really a pertinent work because it's people who decided to organize themselves. And sometimes we used to talk also about institutions, but sometimes it's also to tell the truth because it's people who are behind those processes. I want really to thank people like Sylvain, Delphine, she's not here, but Salima, Mireille is here, Sarah, and yeah, the representative also of SEO. I think all those people who are behind the processes, I think it's really important to say they take the commitment to move with this, and it's wonderful to tell them, the people as David Asher, it is the beginning of the reflection. They were there and they stand and they say, we can do something with this. I think this is very important. To tell also that this report is a result of a commitment of people and a commitment of researchers, because it's a wide really consultation in the 5 continents. And it's also researchers and practitioners for education and jurists who were there and who challenged the questions, challenged the conceptual and challenged the methodology to be sure that we can have a good document. And I think this report is based on the work of all those people. I want really to say them thank you for that. But I want also to say you have told us the big picture for the world, but you continue to know that 1 billion of people are still illiterate in this world. The majority of those people are girls, women, refugees, migrants, but also people who are living with disabilities. We know it is also people who are coming from the rural area, but we know also it is people who are coming from the African continent, but also the Latino American and Asia. This is the most, in the geographical way, who has really not met their right to education. The other trend, and this is a new trend, this word became a word of fear. How can we, if each other is fearing his neighbor, fearing his son, fearing his, because people are coming from other world, has another culture, there is a big fear in this world. And I think the responsibility of education to push values is also that thing we have to talk today, because this is the big trend. The other big trend, and I want really to tell people that never forget that 80%, I said 80% of the refugees of this world are in the south. That is a fact. It is a fact. They are not in the north countries, but they are in the south countries. And they are in the countries where the education system has also problems. You see? But like migrants, refugees are really coming and they are coming in the north. No, 80% of the refugees people are in the south countries. Yes, it's very important to tell this trend. And the other thing also, she has spoken about inequalities. We are really seeing now the other trend is 20% of schools who are taken by the private sector. And usually it is also the commercial private sector who is really taking the places of the government. But we know also that 70 years ago, the world sit and say, we have to move with the liberty and also the solidarity. But we need to be sure that with the declaration of the United Nations, each citizen in each country of this world have to meet his right to education. And this declaration, many countries have signed, ratified this declaration. But what about this today? It's only one country who hasn't done. But what is the situation? We have seen this trend, and the inequalities are really pushed by the private sectors who are taking place. And in this report, I want to highlight the line. The line is to say free, quality, and equitable education. Free, quality, public, and equitable education. This is the line. Because this is what the declaration says. But this is also what many countries have signed. And for us, this is really the line. But the trends we have seen with the private sector today, we need to give tools to the government to be sure that they are able to guide the private sectors, to be sure that they can respect the human rights perspective in this way. That's why the principles of Abidjan has really made and supported by the civil society, and my report is based on that. And the principles of Abidjan are focused on public, free, equity, and also quality education. This is very important. But we told also that we didn't say not private sector, but we said non-profit and commercial private sector, no. No way to give them the way to do that. For us, it's very important to be sure that we have a distinction between the private sector, but also the commercial, the really commercial who are making profit in the education system. And we made some recommendations. The main recommendations is to help to say to states, please use the Abidjan principles to guide all the implementation and planification you will have with the private sector. This is the first recommendation. The second recommendation that it is that the line is public, free, quality, and equitable education. And we can say sometimes, we can say it is not a space for private sector, but it must be a choice for parents and for communities. But the first line is this one. For it is an obligation for the state to do that. But sometimes it can be an opportunity to give also an opportunity to parents and to community to have some private sector as Catholic or Medecins or Protestant who build sometimes also some schools with this spirituality and other things. Now, for us, it's very important to understand that but with the profit organizations, we said no. The third option, recommendations we have made, it is also to say to the institutions as a World Bank that it is not acceptable because they have money to support the countries who has difficulties and challenges with the education system. And World Bank must use a human rights approach to finance those countries. That means they have to respect and also to use Abidjan principles to be sure that the profit organizations, the commercial organizations cannot get the money because this is a public money and it's important to finance public education in the countries. And this is very important because this is a way we are trying to push the World Bank, and we are really asking also your support on this way. The also recommendations is also as GPE. You know also GPE is a mechanism and a global mechanism who is supporting the countries to meet their right of education. And you know sometimes it's also they are building a new strategy. And in this new strategy, GPA is saying we need to use private sector to open to private sector. We write a letter to GPE and tell them also, this is a global partnership for education. You tell them also that is not acceptable to put the money, the public money, for the profit organization. But for us, it's very important to use this money and to strengthen the public education in each country. This is the option, and this is the best option because this can help also to meet the right for everybody. I think also the recommendation we really also made is in the process of how to implement this guiding principles. There is 10 principles. It's very important also to ask people to share this report with you with your email. If we have it, we will really share it with you because it's very important to give information to researchers to help them to be sure that the process we are dealing with these principles, they are able to help, to follow, and to give data, and also to monitor how countries are using it, and also to give feedback and to help it to become more pertinent. I think also the last one is also recommendations to NGOs. You are, I think, sometimes is watchdog of the society. And for me, you are the best actor with these guiding principles. Because if you take it and put it in your hand and yes, you say, we will move with these guiding principles for each country and each region and each continent, I'm sure we will get a better education and we will meet also the right to education for everybody and make this world a better world. Thank you again.
I'd like to invite the panel to come and take their seats in the front, please. Thank you, and a very warm welcome on this blustery day in Washington. My name is Kate Lapham. I work with the education program of the Open Society Foundations and it is my huge privilege to set the stage for this panel and to introduce our panelists this afternoon. So I think the Special Rapporteur is a hard act to follow. I will nonetheless try to do so. What I understood in her remarks is something of the vision that I hold for education, and that I'm sure many in this room hold as well. That it is the crucible of the society we want to create. Our kindergartens and schools and universities are the place where we as educators and policymakers and advocates make the choice to amplify the best in our societies or to amplify the worst. It is the place where we can intervene with an entire community to create the world that we want to live in, to make sure that we are sustainable on our planet, that we are equitable, and that we fulfill the promises that we have made. We've talked a lot, I think, in this meeting about the goal of making sure all 10-year-olds are able to read. The choice, whether that becomes a technical exercise or something that allows our children to interact with the full richness of human knowledge and history, is a choice in that framework. And so I'm incredibly excited to be gathered in this room to speak about the contribution that the Abidjan Principles make to that particular vision of education. And I think there are two very important things that they accomplish. The first is in the content of the principles themselves, which gather together the international legal norms which constitute the promises and the obligations that we have made to the children of the world about our vision and our purpose of education. From the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which talks about education to fulfill the full human potential, through the Convention of the Rights on Persons with Disabilities, which talks about the right to education in fully inclusive settings, including for children with complex disabilities. But the second part of the Abidjan Principles is not as visible as the content itself, because it's not printed in a book, and that is the process through which the principles were achieved and agreed. This is one of the few documents I know of in the international community that was achieved with truly inclusive participation from actors from both the global north and the global south, that has pulled together people working across disciplines and has truly listened to the experiences of people who have lived through a transformation in our educational policy landscape, where the idea of education as a public good has become debatable, where there has been question whether perhaps education for some might not be a private good from which profit can be extracted, or a private good that brings individual benefit, perhaps without benefit to broader society. I don't think it's a surprise for anyone that I stand here from the Open Society Foundations declaring that education is a public good because of the benefit that it brings. But that doesn't mean that there is no role for anyone outside the state. To be sure, there is a huge role for civil society in holding governments to account for meeting their education obligations, for delivering the type of education that makes our communities stronger. There is a place for parent-led schools, for teacher-led schools that are innovative, that are on the edge of the system, that inform and expand our ideas about what is possible, about what types of pedagogy we might like to experience. But there has never been before the idea that those private actors could constitute the system in the place of a state providing public education for all. And I think that the process of the principles has drawn out a lot of the experience of unintended consequences of some of that transformation. And that is what I think we will hear as well from the panel today. We are very lucky to be joined by this esteemed group. We have with us, in addition to Dr. Goldie Berry, who will remain on the panel, Madiana Samba, who is the founder and executive director of Community Action to Restore Lives, an NGO that works on education rights, gender equality, and sexual and reproductive health rights for adolescent girls and women in Sierra Leone, who bring the richness of that experience to speak with us. We have Dr. Halil Dunder, who is the practice manager for Education Global Practice in Central and Southern Africa, and he brings to us his deep experience in education policy in Turkey, in Southeast Europe, and in South Asia, which he will share with us. And we have Zacharias Ramana, who is the Inequality Program and Campaigns Manager for Oxfam in Ghana. leading Oxfam's education work there, and who has deep and rich experience across West Africa and the rest of the continent to share with us. Each panelist will give a small presentation, and we will then have a period of open question and answer with the audience. So for that, I would like to turn it over to him. And you may speak from your seat, or you may come to the podium, whichever is going to make you more comfortable.
Madam Special Rapporteur on the Rights to Education, and distinguished colleagues, I am very, very grateful to be part of this discussion, because the journey to ensuring the rights to education has been a long journey. And all of us in this room, we are here because we are concerned about the situation. We are all aware about the story. It's nothing that is strange to all of us. But what is very, very important is how do we collectively add our voices to ensure that no one is left behind. I will do a short presentation talking about the Sierra Leone context, the education context in Sierra Leone, sharing the challenges of our education sector, and also a little bit on the Abidjan principles and how that ties in with the education system that we're currently having in Sierra Leone, and then also make some recommendations for the government and the World Bank, especially talking about what Madam has said on public-private partnership in education. Sierra Leone, if you're following the story of Sierra Leone is a small West African country, and we are like a population of 7.6 million people, and we have been faced with a horrible 10-year war. We had experienced a mudslide that was really, really a story that was so devastating to everyone. Our Ebola story was also one that was very devastating, and also we faced several flash floods. And amidst all of these, education has been a victim. The education system in the country was almost dead. It was in a coma when we had a new regime that took place, that took governance, and decided that for this regime to ensure that we build a human capital that will be able to address issues of inequality, injustices, and poverty, reduction of poverty, we need to invest in the people that are within our nation. And so when His Excellency President Dr. Julius Maada Bio took over last year, he decided to prioritize the human capital program. And so he implemented the free quality school education. Now, that speaks to the public education we are talking about. And so that free quality education actually catered for every child. So it's free from primary to secondary level. So all bills that we're talking about, when you are talking about tuition, is covered by government. So you can imagine the huge resources that is being invested. Now, the free quality education also covers textbooks, core textbooks in languages, in core subjects like language, English language, mathematics, social studies, and one more. Yes, English, science, mathematics, and social studies. Now, it also comprises different components that speak to the Abidjan principles. It talks about access, which Madam has actually expounded on, equity, completion, quality, relevance, integrity, and system strengthening. You would all agree with me that for you to be educated from the early childhood development stage right on to university level takes time. and it's a huge investment. It's about your mother, your father taking care of your lunch, taking care of your transportation, taking care of your safety, etc. Now, I want to share a short personal story so you understand the context in which children go to school in Sierra Leone, how they are, being able to access education. Now, my father abandoned my mother when I was 7. My mother is a trained nurse. She's now retired, a retired midwife. And since age 7, now nursery education starts at age 3 in my country, and then you go to primary school at age 6. So I was then in primary 1 for our context. My mother, as a nurse, had to make sure that I eat every day, I go to school with lunch, and I am protected from sexual abuse. Now, majority of the children in the Sierra Leone situation, most of them don't go into what you call early childhood education or childhood development. They don't have the opportunity to attend nursery education, so they don't have the foundation. Now, because my mother was very, very keen on ensuring that I have an education of good quality, when I reached the level where I wanted to take my NPSC then, the National Primary School Education, which was then called the Selective Entrance Examination, a friend advised her that the potential I see in your daughter, you really need to spend some more money on her. And so she advised her to move me from a public school to a private school. Now you can imagine, for a nurse who is not earning up to, I would say, 10 leones then, for her to pay 60 leones, which I don't even know how to add up the mathematics. But let's just say now, for this period now, you would need to spend $1,000, which is like 10 million leones in our money to go to a private school. So because she had to make that choice, my mother sold soap. I know how to make soap because my mother taught me how to make soap. She sold palm oil. She did all sorts of odd jobs to be able to make ends meet. And so when we are talking about private education, people who make profit out of commercial education, these are the burdens they put on families, poor families. Yeah? Whether you say the fees are low, it's definitely not low. Whether you want to say the teachers are more qualified, it's not the truth. Because the same teachers that are teaching in those schools are the ones teaching in the public schools. So I'm sharing the story because I need you to understand that when children in the rural areas go to school, we still have schools in Sierra Leone that kids have to sit on stones. He will share his experience when he visits one of our schools. Kids sit under trees to be able to access education. So even though now we have a positive approach towards ensuring that we get everyone to secure their rights to education as enshrined in the UDHR of 1948, Article 23, everyone has a right to education. My mentor is here, David Acha. I appreciate you so much for the knowledge sharing. And when we come together as civil society, the campaign towards education financing, we are pleased that today government did not, drop that allocation. Instead, it's 21%. So these are the moves, the steps that the current government has taken to make sure that public education should be accessible to everyone, and it should be of good quality. It's not a nice picture as I'm painting it. It has challenges, definitely. You would want to ask, where do we generate money to be able to support such kind of education? Do we really have quality? Is there quality? Is there learning taking place? Now, this system is very good, and we really appreciate government because it's the first move that shows that you are supporting the Abidjan principles, you are supporting other international instruments, and also our own constitution. But then we have to face the reality that we have a huge task ahead. Whilst we have that task, we are competing with a situation where we are made to believe that investment in private partnership education is a solution for us to be able to meet the SDGs on education and other rights. Now, if we have such challenges in such a beautiful thing that government is doing, we have buses now that take children to school, which solves the issue of transportation. Even though we are sending it to the districts, children in villages still walk, and those areas that they walk through are not safe. So, if we have a situation where girls are being sexually molested in school, we have issues of sex for grades, and we have issues of water for water. Now, water for water is related to sex for grades. Water for water is early in the morning, because we have a water crisis. Not all parts have water, access to water and sanitation. Girls go out like 2 a.m. in the morning to fetch water. And the boys will say, water for water. Excuse me, you know what that means. Water for water. So they have sex with girls for them to be able to access water. So it's a situation where, even though you want to ensure quality, you want to ensure protect rights and all of that, you have issues that you have to grapple with. So government is highly challenged. Her Excellency, Madam Fatima Bio, now said we are going to have a campaign on hands off a girls, because if we also want to achieve gender parity, we want to make sure that issues that actually discriminate against girls, for them to be able to complete schools, we have to tackle those problems as well. So as I speak to you, there's a national launch of the Hands Off a Girls campaign. She's going district by district to be able to implement that campaign. So that is the context. That is what we are faced with. It's a nice situation, but then we are challenged. On PPPs, even though we have those challenges, the issue of the qualification of private schools, every day we have them popping up. And we don't want to have a situation where we will have PPPs in education that will be widening the inequality gap. And so we want to add our voices to the campaign, to Madam's view, and also all the research reports that Oxfam has put together, false promises, how delivering education through public-private partnerships risks fueling inequality instead of achieving quality education for all. Now, that's an Oxfam report which we would like to read. All of us advise, if you haven't read it, let us read it and understand the situation that is happening with PPPs. My colleague from Ghana will explain, but we know that in Liberia, kids are missing out on school because of this kind of approach to education. And so I have a series of questions to ask. If we want to embrace, our government want to embrace PPPs, as civil society, we should not just be standing by and be mere onlookers. We should be able to ask critical questions. Who bears the cost when things go wrong? Why do our governments not allow the public to view PPP contracts? Is it a secret society? In Sierra Leone, when we say secret society, you can only be a member for you to be initiated, for you to go through FGM, for you to go through co-op. So it's not a secret society. So I'm pleased that when in our engagements and meetings, we're able to understand that the bank is actually looking at, developing country partnership frameworks where we'll have CSO consultations, and where we'll have everybody on board, parliamentarians, government, all the actors will come on board to be able to discuss this. So we are seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. Why are the people not consulted widely before such interventions? These are questions I asked before the meeting. And then, why is the trend different from, developed nations? So if we can reflect on those questions, I think it will help us to be able to be clear. I don't know if my time is up. So can I just give my recommendations to our government and
30 seconds, and then we need to get on the train to Ghana.
Okay, I think our government is on the right track, but then we need to consolidate our efforts to make sure that education is actually of good quality. We also need to organize a national dialogue on how this initiative can be sustained through CSO involvement in monitoring and advocating for strengthening capacities. Furthermore, our government must regulate private schools and ensure those schools open doors for entry of out-of-school children, children with disabilities, and special needs children. That way, the realization of the right to education for all is promoted and no child is discriminated against. We should also negotiate with the bank to ensure funding models for Sierra Leone support the FQSE and by no means encourage commercialized education programs which would only widen the gap and open gates for discrimination and inequality. I will move down to the World Bank. I would say I support strongly the Special Rapporteur's recommendation that states providing international cooperation funds do not provide resources to international and regional financial institutions and investors that finance commercial providers of education or that foster the growth of private education. We also want to see the Abidjan Principles further detailed conditions under which states can still fund private actors and list the type of actors that may be eligible for funding. So we want the bank to ensure that they actually support our government to be able to critically look at this partnership agreement and to see that they are in line with the right to education, which Madam also spoke about. We make sure that we are within the framework, that rights are not abused, our children are protected, and we are able to have free, public, quality, equitable education for all children. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. My submissions will rely a lot on experiences in Ghana. Since we embarked on our democratic dispensation in 1992, we have committed to a free, universal, basic education as a right. And this is enshrined in Article 25 of Ghana's Constitution. And riding on that by government after government has seen us make remarkable progress in extending access. In other words, achieving higher enrollment rates in Ghana. Indeed, the numbers have it that the gross enrollment ratio is over 100%, and the net enrollment ratio is hovering a little above 80%. Gender parity in primary schools, especially at the lower levels, is 1%. So if you look at these figures, you are likely to conclude that in a context like Ghana, the right to education is being addressed and addressed fully. I will agree to some extent, but with some caveats. This is just the right of access for the majority of the people. But what happens inside the schools and in the classrooms leaves a lot of concerns about the extent to which education is addressed as a right. But even before we get into what happens in the school and the classroom, there are still a large number of out-of-school children. A lot of these children are out of reach. In other words, they don't live within vicinities where there are schools, let alone for them to get access to school. But when we get into a school setting and the classroom setting, there are a number of issues that hinge on the rights to education, and which I would like to submit here. One is that we seem to focus our attention on quality, on test scores. Even that one, it is telling us that we are not doing too well. Children will complete grade 6 and will not be able to read simple text and understand them. But the deeper problem is that, is education only meant to train children how to read and write? No. I think when we talk about quality education, we are talking about education that gives children the skills to read and write, but also builds in them the values and skills to support cohesive, peaceful societies, support democracy, the growth of democracy, become active citizens, and acquire all the skills and values that makes them active participants in the society. This is one challenge we are facing in addressing the right to education. The second is that, and it is very much related to this, is that teachers are not available in the right quantities and with the right training. Very often you go to rural areas and trained teachers are inadequate. You find one teacher teaching more than one grade. That compromises quality to a very large extent. In the urban settings, you find classrooms that have as many as 60 to 70 students for one teacher to manage. That also does not allow teachers to apply the right pedagogical practices in order that they can deliver transformative education and imbibe in children these skills and values I earlier on alluded to. And talking about teachers, one emerging threat or challenge we have is contained in the advice we receive from the bank, which is to the extent that our government, for instance, was not only advised to promote PPPs, but to lower the standards for teacher certification in private schools. Currently, the standard is that every private school should have at least 3 trained teachers. And if we are receiving technical advice to this end, you can imagine that we are going to promote a situation where most schools will be run and taught by teachers who are not certificated. And that will dilute the right to quality education. The other thing I want to add is that there is weak accountability for learning outcomes. In most of our schools, the accountability mechanisms appear to be upward. Teachers only try to do the right things when supervisors are around. That is their superiors. But downward to parents, there exists nothing in most situations. Where there exists semblance of accountability, it is very weak for very obvious reasons. And that is, one, the heads of schools and teachers are dealing with a great majority of parents who find it difficult to understand what quality education is and what to demand of the school system and therefore teachers. And again, this is an emerging threat to the right to quality education. I want to talk about 2 more emerging challenges, and then I will stop there. The next one is about delivering education to populations affected by emergencies. I was in Sierra Leone when Ebola broke out, and schools had to close for almost 1 year. Yes. Recently, we experienced a cyclone in Mozambique. Schools had to close. And it tells you that in many developing countries, education plans and development plans for that matter are not resilient and are not prepared to respond to emergencies and continue to provide education as a right to children even under the emergencies. The last but not the least issue I want to bring up has to do with spending patterns of governments, which goes in a long way to deepen inequalities within schools. In one of Oxfam's reports, an average of about 47% of public spending is spent on the top 10% richest people, on the education of the 10 top percent richest people. And just about 20% is spent on the lowest, on the poorest 10%. With spending patterns like this, what happens in reality is that a lot of the trained teachers are supplied to the rich, learning materials are supplied to the rich. Everything that makes teaching and learning effective is supplied to those who are mostly in urban areas and in the higher income bracket. When that happens, and as that is happening, many poor children go into schools and complete without acquiring their right to quality education. And that exacerbates inequality between the rich and the poor, the majority of whom are girls. I'll stop here for a while.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Khalid Ildar. I'm the education manager, as mentioned, covering the West and Southern Africa. Thanks so much for excellent presentation, Dr. Berry. I've enjoyed it. I would like to just have some remarks what we have been doing at the bank in this area actually. As a task team leader, as a manager, I've been managing programs across the region, including Sierra Leone and Ghana. We had a brief chat before this meeting. Actually, almost everything said, I fully agree. We have been really supporting the government's program across the region. Before joining the Africa team, I was in South Asia, the same kind of engagement we had with governments. Governments come to the bank and then they request support for the design and implementation of their education programs. Right now, today, I don't know if any of you attended the event by our president, Mr. Melpa's lunch, with the learning poverty targets we have. And a year ago, we had the WDR focusing on the learning crisis. I think we have the same goal, same objective, free education for all in basic education. So at the same time, from the bank side, when we go, and Sierra Leone is an example, or Ghana, right now we have been working with the government, how to help the government to design and implement free basic education, or actually free even high school education in the case of Ghana. So the challenges we finance. The governments come to the bank for technical advice and the support. Our engagement with the Minister of Education, as you are Minister of Education, how do we put together a program to support? Most of our interventions in Sierra Leone and in Ghana right now in the area of public education, how to strengthen the quality of education, how to provide quality education for all, including girls. This is not just now, but before even 3-4 years ago it started. 10 years ago we were discussing the same issues in Nigeria. In Nigeria, as you may know, there are about 13 million out-of-school children right now. At this point, as we speak, they don't have access to education. We talk about the literacy base. So the challenges are huge. Then question, the example I was giving earlier on Sierra Leone, Sierra Leone, despite this terrible 2 crises they had, or maybe 3, the civil war, Ebola, and then the sliding a year ago, the Sierra Leone achieved quite a bit in basic education in terms of the numbers of students. But the Sierra Leone's challenge is the population is growing, and the government could not, for various reasons, could not implement the program. And then about 10, the numbers I look at, about the government has about 10% of the schools they call government-owned schools, and then about 70% or so non-government schools. These are missionary schools and so on. About 10% private schools, they don't know what it is. So our role, when they came to us, we said, how do we help you? A year ago, new government came to the bank, and then they have requested support for the design and implementation of the free education program. And we said, actually they said, can you come with other partners, development partners? So our team we have been working closely with the government and partners and civil society, really help them to design, to put together a free quality education for all. The resources, of course, limited, and the question is how do you provide support when you have also very big ministry to manage, to monitor, to have some accountability mechanism at different levels of the system. So it's kind of, you are starting from very low base, and this is the case in Sierra Leone. In Ghana, as you mentioned, Ghana is one of the countries achieved quite a bit in expanding basic education. Then the numbers were given 100% gross enrollment rate, about over 80% net enrollment in basic education. The Ghana's challenges, there are 2 challenges actually in both countries, but in Ghana's challenge right now, what we call inequity in learning outcomes. Today, what the President Malpas was talking about, if 10 years old cannot read and write, how could Ghana can become a growing competitive country? Cannot. So the challenge is there. Again, the government came to the bank. How do you provide support? Not obviously, the bank is still within the scope of the overall government's spending on education. We are still a small player. But the question is, how do we really help from the bank side to help them bring the international, regional experience, and obviously the government is in the driver's seat, not we are just supporting, we are the financing, providing support to provide really quality education, accountable at the same time for all. This is in Ghana in basic education. So our role, the way we see it, really how to strengthen the delivery of the public and education for all, quality education. But our focus up to now, maybe until recently, we said, okay, let's expand the basic education. But the challenge is not expansion. If they are not learning, actually, then we are obviously the whole inefficiency in the system. The other part of the problem is the whole this girls' empowerment. I think your example is, it's just not in Sierra Leone, Liberia, Ghana, Nigeria, all the countries I've been working. This is a major challenge. We need to tackle this. The ministries, some ministries, recently the government is trying to tackle this issue in Sierra Leone. Many countries, how do we work together? Obviously we are a small player. We do admit that we provide advice, financial support, but this is a major challenge. Unless you tackle this issue, the women's empowerment, girls' empowerment through education, you cannot succeed. You cannot achieve what the countries are trying to do. So our interventions, both in Ghana, Sierra Leone, through actually before GP funded project, the bank was the implementing agency, we have been providing the support to schools. We were monitoring teacher attendance and school the girls' attendance. So that we are trying to ensure that these 2 issues are being tackled. Right now in Ghana, the same thing. In Sierra Leone, we have strong focus on the girls' empowerment. They should have access to quality education. So, but the one area is unclear, the way I see it. The public education, I think you said rightly so, Dr. Perry, the private education, but there are commercial entities out there.
Yes.
So, I mean, the bank is, as far as I know, my team, myself, I have not engaged, I have not worked, I don't know. But in the case of Sierra Leone, there are a large number of community-based schools. I mentioned earlier, this was one of the schools I visited a year ago in Sierra Leone, one of the worst. I mean, you can say we can all find different schools, but it was the worst school, mud, brick. Just the students were there to spend time. No learning was happening. So, but there are many of them. How do you provide support to those schools? How do you ensure the minimum quality exists in those schools? I think that's the challenge the Sierra Leone is facing, the Northern Nigeria is facing, and the Lagos, the country I used to work, manage now, about the two-thirds of the schools are private. But what does it mean private? I guess we mix up the numbers. Because there are commercial schools, definitely, but there are many of them mission-related schools. So how do they really ensure that minimum quality, even in those schools, exists? So these are some of the, I think, challenges we have. We try to really be responsive to quality education for all in basic education. I think the bank's today's lunch that is the goal we have. Ending learning poverty, that's our objective. But that's what we are trying to do. I fully agree with the way you summarize. One thing I would like to stress on your report, I think learning poverty reduction should be our main goal for all.
Thanks to you and to all of the panel for those very rich presentations. I think we have probably about 20 minutes for question and answer response with the audience. And we do have a microphone in the front of the room, and so I would like to invite people who have a question to approach the mic. And we'll take maybe 2 or 3 questions at a time, and then let the panel respond and see if we have time for another round. And I can see there's a great amount of polite deference happening in the front of the room, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Abdullah Abdurrahim from Initiative for Sound Education, Relationship and Health, Nigeria. I really commend the efforts you've put together in the report and all the things you said. It's just a reflection of what is obtainable in almost all parts of West Africa, Nigeria inclusive. The area I want to ask a question, supporting by a few statements, is that are you concerned about international organizations that measure the impact and even give award to government based on what they've seen the government done in the area of education without taking few patience in understanding the input of the government in such education program? For example, in Nigeria, where I come from, a governor of a state introduced e-tablets for high school students, despite the fact that this is a community, this is a state with power epileptic, we don't have electricity like that, and without any check. Then an international organization went ahead to give such a government an award for introducing such a program, such a tablet. Less than 2 years, you can't find such tablet in any school, and about 8 billion naira was spent on that project. The project, the money that's supposed to have been spent on the quality of education, the quality of starting the education, is being spent on what is nothing. Thank you so much.
David Archer from ActionAid. 2 points. For the World Bank, I think it's wonderful that the vast majority of money goes to support public education, but it is a scandal that any money goes, any public money that is basically going through the World Bank should be supporting private provision of any type. And I think we need an unequivocal statement that the World Bank will not support commercial provision in future, and it's time to have that statement made as soon as possible. So if you're in contact with David Malpass, please raise that directly with him. We welcome the support of public education, but it should be 100% of the bank support, and there should be no space for support of commercial providers, which is happening with the minority grants at the moment and needs to end. The second point is, I think the learning poverty framing is, it sort of creates a mystification, and there is no mystery about why children are not learning today. It is because you've had a massive expansion of public education provision in recent years without a massive expansion of public financing. And here, the World Bank and the IMF are also crucially responsible, because at the same time as you've had massive expansion in the number of children going to school, you have not had adequate expansion of financing. And one of the biggest reasons, one of the biggest blocks, is that the World Bank and the IMF have continued to put pressure on governments to hold down the public sector wage bill. Now, you cannot employ more teachers or doctors or nurses if you have massive constraints on your public sector wage bill. We need to have macroeconomic policies framed and designed by the World Bank and the IMF, which will facilitate the expansion of provision of essential services like education and health. At the moment, the macroeconomic fundamentalism comes first and creates an environment in which the expansion of financing for education is not a possibility for most countries.
David,
so we need
thanks so
reversal
much
of
for
that.
thank you. A question, please. I think we have maybe time for one or two more.
Okay, Mark Harris from United Methodist Church, and I also work with the Global Campaign for the U.S. campaign. I've always tried to understand this, and this is through the World Bank. When you fund education programs in the country, do you fund buildings? What do the facilities look like that you fund? Because many times when I look at Africa, I still have the pictures that we see, how the buildings look, and the students all sitting up so close together has been a concern. And lastly, as you talk about education for all, you still act like African countries don't have what we call ethnic problems or tribal problems. Like, are there areas where, because you're a member of a particular ethnic group, you get schools first and so forth like that? So I'd like to hear you address that issue.
Okay, thank you very much. The panel, you have done a very phenomenal work. So my name is Emmanuel, University of Maryland, College Park, and Kenyan by origin. I wish to raise two issues. One is with regard to, as enrollment numbers increase, how do we tackle the issue of teacher-learner ratio? Because prior to coming here, I was a high school teacher, teaching a class of 55 learners. And because I was teaching a compulsory subject, English literature, I'm teaching 4 different grades. That means in each day I have contact with 55 learners in 4 different classes. So that one actually compromises quality. So how do we address that? And lastly, how do we deal with school policies that keep away children from school? For instance, some countries or some public schools have policies like suspensions of students from school when they commit minor disciplinary issues, and a student is kept out of school for 14 days. How do we address such like internal problems? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I know we're very limited for time, but I would not be a proper feminist if I did not give the first woman who would like to ask the question the floor.
Thank you. My name is Lydia Okun, and I work for a civil society organization in Nigeria focused on children and youth. And I think with 13 million out of school children in Nigeria, it's a concern. But when we hear about free education for all, we hear the words free, inclusive, qualitative, equitable. And I think if we were to do a qualitative analysis of what free is, because if you say free in Nigeria, you don't pay school fees, but you have to pay other things. You live very far and there's no school buses to bring you. So what is free? I don't know if that's those complexities and challenges were talked about in the process, because These are some of the issues that keep people away from school. And when there are more than 1 or 2 or 3 children, then the girl child always has to be the one that pays the price. Because when parents have to make a choice, we have 4 children, I need to send about, I can only afford to send 1 or 2. It's always the boy child. Which brings me to my second question, the gender part, the abuse of children that go to school. We work with a lot of children who have been abused. We have in Nigeria one school where the principal in the secondary school was pimping out the girls, students, to outside people. So there's really an issue of security and protection for the girl child, to be able to, for them to be able to access qualitative and equitable education. So I want to know about those two, how free is free, and what are we doing with the girl child? Thank you.
Thank you. I think unfortunately that might be all that we have time for in this round. But I'd like to ask each of the panelists, including the Special Rapporteur, if you would like to respond in perhaps 3 or 4 minutes, if you could, to the questions that have been asked. Please.
Thank you very much for the questions. I think I just take some because some are addressed to the World Bank and I think also the other colleagues. I think the question of quality of education is really quality and also equity, because we are talking about gender perspective, but also we are talking about how to pilot, how to manage the education system. If I have a recommendation to do, is the first thing is very important to decentralize the education system. Give the power to the local communities. Give the financial resources to the local communities. Please involve teachers union, involve the civil society who is in the local area, involve the parents, the organization of parents in the local area, and give them the power to manage the schools, to manage the colleges, and I'm sure you will find the ways to see how to help girls to learn in a security way. I can share an example in Burkina. I was a Minister of Education. One lesson I learned for girls' education after the primary school, it's very important to have what they call boarding schools, to help them to have this space where they are able to be secure and to make also socializations, because you have time to give them all the informations as sexual reproduction and other things. It's very important, because we have seen for many years, I'm coming from a rural area, I'm coming from an ethnic group, nomadic people. In my country, in Burkina, it's 2% of girls of nomadic people who are at school. 2%. I think I'm one exceptional person in this process. But if it's happened, it is also because the education system helps to do that. When we move from primary school to secondary, we have those boarding schools. And it's easy to stay there, and yes, there is security and other things to help girls to learn. I think the government in many states and the World Bank, if you are really supporting countries, please just also sometimes things where we learned as the lessons and the good lessons, it's good to see and how you are able to advise the government. This morning we meet also some of your colleagues and we advise them in this process of decentralization. The third thing I want really to highlight about those questions is also, yes, we have seen it is not only in Nigeria, we have also seen in other countries where for ICTs, I said this is also the consequences of commercial, for involving commercial actors in the process of educating people. Because ICTs, first of all, is instrument produced by companies, and they need money. They want only money, and they want just people to buy the things. And it's very important to see how to conceptualize before using those kind of tools, and how to contextualize also, because we can have good experience in some countries, but it's very important to say in this way. It's very important. One thing also, the last thing I want to add, for the World Bank, as lessons we learn, it's very important also to see the holistic vision of education. If you are providing advices to countries, please, it's important to go from early childhood, primary, secondary, Tibet, but also university. It's very important to have this holistic vision if you are providing support to countries, and to see challenges and see also how you are able to deal with the training of teachers. Because if an institution and an organization tell to the country, we will give you money, but for training teachers it's only 1 year. I know what I'm talking about, because I was a minister of education in my country. The first decision when I arrived in this Ministry of Education is to push for high level teachers level for the recruitment of teachers, and also to say for training teachers, it is not 1 year because it's not enough. It is 2 years minimum. This is a minimum of standard to help also people to have a good profile of teachers. Without good teachers, trained, good level, but also motivated. This is very important not to forget. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. I would want to respond to the issue of enrollment increased. Yeah, the increased enrollment figures. I may not have it on top of my head for the entire world, but definitely for us in Sierra Leone, we have, I wouldn't say we don't have any more out of school children, because we are still implementing programs for girls who think they cannot go back to school. We had the issue of pregnant girls returning to school, and we had a campaign to make sure that they include them. Even though they are pregnant, they also have a right to education. So enrollment rates have increased, yes. We have large class sizes as a result of that. We have issues of accommodation, so it's not like 100% fine situation, even though you are implementing a free policy. So you definitely expect increase, an influx of people. So are we then prepared to accept all of those children that are coming into school? Because we are also saying, if we want to have quality, we also need to stop the double shifts, because we had double shifts because of lack of space. So the GP fund provided construction of additional schools, and then the provision of furniture. For issues relating to suspensions that you mentioned, we don't actually suspend children. During our UNICEF project, we implemented, my organization partnered with UNICEF and supported the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology then to implement the out of school and girls access to education project. And in that project, we are really looking at corporal punishment as a deterrent to children's conflicts in school. So we had the kids to engage them, and they developed alternative forms of discipline. So we don't do those kind of disciplines that will further, make children miss out from school. So if that may answer your question. The other thing, my sister, this is a key issue, and this is very close to my heart. And so I'm partnering with Oxfam. We are on a global campaign, enough campaign, which we are domesticating in Sierra Leone, and it's about the reduction of school-related gender-based violence, and specifically sexual violence. We have worked, and the government has actually, ratified the Sexual Offences Act, And this campaign would give a platform for girls to really come out to talk about those issues and also, get strategies to be able to solve them and minimize them in schools and also in communities. We also have peer mentors within the schools, and we have girls' conferences where we give them a platform to have self-confidence, and we also, have a project that we're working with them to do sanitary pads and also campaigning on the introduction of comprehensive sexuality education in school, because we think that is one sure way that we can curb and reduce sexual violence against girls, because it's as if they are using it as a weapon to make sure that we don't achieve gender parity. I think other people will have more to say. We have the Hands Off Our Girls campaign and different steps that are being taken to make sure that girls don't miss out, and we also empower women who don't feel comfortable going to normal schools. Thank you.
I think we would like the gentleman from the World Bank response, since I think there's a huge body of questions here.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for excellent questions. There are some questions at the, I would say, at the macro level related to banks' policy interventions, and there are also some country-specific implementation and design-related issues. I hear you in terms of the 100% commitment to no commercial financing, commercial education financing. As far as I know, in my programs we don't have, and then I mentioned in my programs. I gave three examples: Nigeria, Ghana, and Sierra Leone. We are fully committed. I would say I cannot 100% could not say because I don't know what's happening around the world. I would say, but as far as I know, this is the programs I manage, quite a large number of them. So we are committed to support government's program in the provision of quality education for all. I also heard about broad macro finance, IMF. That's the discussion. Obviously, it's not just education, the sector issue, but much broader finance discussion actually taking place. But as you heard, there is an institutional commitment to human capital, which you are aware, and then today on the learning policy. So there is push on this. Then the question is the provision of tablet. I don't know if you are referring to Ekiti State or State. Which one? Also State. I haven't heard that. So I think one thing we feel from the bank side, the application should not be behind in terms of what's happening globally, technology-wise, and access to the global, the new technology, new information. So I think about the regional engagement. But whether it is implemented right way or wrong way, that is a separate question. I think the Ministers of Education will be deciding. The second, there was a question about construction. We do finance. There are, in fact, we helped Ghana to expand secondary education. We do finance. Depends on really how the governments come to the bank, what kind of issues they do have, and then expansion of a small amount, but we do finance. But in Sierra Leone, for example, we are discussing much longer engagement, because in Sierra Leone, whole school networking is to be discussed, and then how do we provide support and expand the school. One of the issues in Sierra Leone and in Liberia is an example. 24 countries, what they call, they don't have any JSS. How could you provide access to girls' education in such an environment? Which is, some of them are related to what you referred to in terms of this whole GDP, girls' attendance, access, a set of issues related to availability of the quality infrastructure in countries. And then I think there was a good question about free education, what it means. That's a good question. It's not just the provision of the infrastructure or teachers, but whole household related expenditures, financing the fees, the school fees, the textbooks, a set of other related the expenditures that needs to be taken into account, especially in our, at least when we discuss in the context of the poor, how they can benefit. That needs to be discussed. In fact, that's part of our discussion in Ghana, Sierra Leone. How do you provide free education? It needs to look at all. So that's where I will end. I'm happy to answer questions with you later.
So thank you very much for that. I think with the permission of the audience, we'll go maybe about 5 minutes over, but I understand that Dr. Boliveri has a train to catch, and Amtrak waits for no one, so we will excuse you if you have to leave us early. Thank you so much for joining. So, we had actually not intended to end the panel. I apologize if I was unclear in my communication. If you're able to stay for a few more minutes, we will say proper farewell to each other.
Thank you very much. I'll add a few more responses to some of the questions raised. How do we keep up quality education in the face of expansion in enrollment? And how do we ensure that every child gets into school? I think the bottom line is investment. How much funding is available to provide quality education and provide all the inputs that will be required for quality education. We often go back to the international recommendations that countries should spend about 20% of their annual budget or 6% of the GDP. I will encourage country governments to look at this recommendation critically against their needs and then the size of their GDPs. If your economy is small and your problems are big, you may have to take an extra mile and spend a bit more than the 6% of GDP to ensure that everyone gets quality, free public education. But the facts are clear that developing countries are not able to marshal all the resources for now. Maybe in the long term, with aggressive domestic revenue mobilization through reforms of tax regimes that will enable countries to collect more from wealthy individuals and corporations. Until then, the World Bank and all other donor countries will have to step up aid to developing countries to fund education, especially public education. And I want to join you, David Acha, in calling on the bank, emphasizing our call on the bank to direct all of its public aid money to public education in developing countries. And then as the bank and the IMF gives advice to our country governments, we would have to be mindful of the social impacts these have. David made reference to the net freeze. I talked about the SABA framework in which the Ghana government was advised to adopt PPP in education. This has grave social impacts. It has direct impact on creating or widening inequality. So as international institutions engage with our governments in terms of providing them with technical advice, this advice should take care of the social needs of the populations the governments serve. At the end of the day, the advice you are given should not disadvantage anybody and keep anybody out of reach or out of enjoying quality education. And I think I will stop here. Thank you.
The experience at the end of this panel is not unlike the transition from primary to secondary school, where there are many who find themselves in need of leaving early. But I would like to take a moment to reflect on what we've heard, because I think that as we, in the field of international development and in the field of education, as we continue to try to meet the short-term crisis, the immediate needs of children who are children now and who are growing up as children do, and balance that with a sustainable vision of the future that delivers the kind of education that we want for our societies, we will need to maintain this conversation, particularly as climate change will intensify some of the challenges that our education systems face, and as we see the need to collaborate across sectors and sections of the bank, I imagine, on questions like tax justice, which will help us to find the funding that we need for our public education systems. So I hope that these vibrant conversations continue over the next few days and far into the future. I thank you all for joining us, and I especially thank our